Welcome to the Regency Gazette, where love is earned in candlelit drawing rooms, secrets hide behind lace and courtesy, and every promise is tested by duty and desire. If you enjoy these Regency romance tales, please subscribe for more stories each week, and tap the bell so you never miss a new chapter. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. The Cartographer's Shadow. The salt-scoured city of Port Marchant clung to the edge of the kingdom like a limpet to a hull, and Elara Finch felt much the same way about her life within it. She was 22, the daughter of Silas Finch, the most renowned cartographer on the coast. From their workshop perched on a hill above the bustling harbour, she could see the masts of 100 ships swaying like a skeletal forest, and beyond them, the ever-shifting, deceptive grey of the Sea of Thorns. Her world was one of vellum and ink, of precise lines and impossible standards. Silas Finch was a genius, a man who could capture the curl of a wave and the treachery of a submerged reef with equal fidelity. He was also a ghost. A wasting illness had claimed his body 5 years ago, leaving behind a brilliant, clouded mind and hands that shook too violently to hold a steady pen. He spent his days by the fire, wrapped in blankets, staring at the maps on the wall as if navigating the faded routes of his own memories. The business of Finch cartography should have crumbled. But Elara, his silent apprentice, would not let it. From the age of 12, she had ground his pigments, mixed his inks, and watched his every stroke. She knew the difference between a good map and a Finch map. A good map showed you where the land was. A Finch map showed you how to survive the sea in between. So, when the orders for naval charts arrived from the Admiralty or requests for coastal surveys from the Merchant Guild, Elara would shut herself in the back room. She traced her father's old templates, but it was her own hand that filled in the soundings, her own eye that placed the danger marks, her own memory of the coast she'd explored as a child that gave the charts their vital, breathing truth. Her father's name, in a script she had perfected to mimic his own, went in the bottom right corner. The world saw the work of the master. Only Elara knew it was the daughter who held the pen. Her deception was a fortress, and within it she was safe. Until the day Captain Liam Thorne walked through her door. He was not a man who moved quietly. His presence seemed to displace the very air in the room. Tall, with a weathered face carved by wind and salt, and eyes the colour of a stormy sea, he carried the deck of a ship with him even on land. He placed a worn, much-folded chart on her table, the paper soft as cloth from use. "Miss Finch," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I was told your father is the man to see about a map." Elara kept her hands busy, straightening a pile of paper. "He is, Captain. But he is unwell. I act as his assistant. Perhaps I can help you." "It's not for a new map," he said, his gaze intense. "It's for an interpretation of an old one." He tapped the chart. It was a standard Admiralty issue of the northern coast, but it was covered in his own annotations, crosses, circles, and notes in a tiny, sharp script. "I've been hunting the sea serpent for 6 months. A smuggler, ghost. She slips through every patrol, every blockade. We know her ports of call, a cove near Blackwater Point, a hidden inlet by the Drowned Men rocks. But by the time we get there, she's vanished. It's like the sea itself swallows her." Elara looked at the map, her curiosity piqued despite her wariness. "The currents are fierce around the Drowned Men," she murmured, half to herself. A captain would need to know them intimately to navigate there at night. "Intimately or suicidally," Thorne agreed. He leaned closer, and she caught a faint scent of tar and clean salt air. "My theory is that she's not just running. She's trading. There's a network on shore, someone receiving her goods, but the coast is a labyrinth of caves and smugglers' paths. My Admiralty charts are too broad. They show the coast, but not the secrets held within an inch of it. I need a Finch map, one that doesn't just chart the water, but the land's relationship to it. The hidden coves a small boat could slip into, the old drovers' trails that lead from the cliffs to the market towns, the kind of detail your father is famous for. He was asking for a weapon, a map not for sailing, but for hunting. The thought thrilled her and terrified her in equal measure. She couldn't draw it. That would mean revealing the extent of her own intimate knowledge of the coast, knowledge she had poured into dozens of anonymous charts over the years. It would be a signature. "My father's work takes time, Captain," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "And his health." "I can pay," he said, his stormy eyes holding hers, "handsomely, and I can wait, but I won't be put off." He straightened up, rolling the chart. "Think on it. The safety of this port and the lives of the men on my ship may well depend on the secrets that coast holds." He left as abruptly as he arrived, the door clicking shut behind him. The workshop, which had felt so full a moment before, now seemed hollow and empty. Ilara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That night, she crept into her father's room. He was dozing, his breath a shallow rasp. On his wall, amongst the many charts, was his masterpiece, a hand-drawn map of the entire coastline from Port Marchant to the northern headlands. It was a work of art, every cliff, every stream, every submerged rock rendered in exquisite detail. Ilara knew it by heart. She had stared at it for years, tracing the coastline with her eyes, imagining the hidden places. As she looked now, with a hunter's purpose, she saw what she had always seen. But now she also saw what Captain Thorne was looking for. Her gaze fell on a particular spot, a small indentation just north of Blackwater Point. On the official charts, it was a blank, featureless curve. On her father's map, a tiny, almost imperceptible line indicated a narrow cleft in the cliffs, a hidden ravine, a path from the sea to the high moorland, a smuggler's road. A shiver ran down her spine. She knew, with the certainty of a cartographer reading a familiar landscape, that her father hadn't just charted the coast. He had mapped the criminal network that used it. And for years, without knowing it, Ilara had been updating his work, providing the Admiralty with the very charts that allowed the smugglers to navigate the dangers, while keeping the land-based secrets locked away in the master copy on the wall. She had been forging more than maps. She had been forging the chains of a trap, and now she was standing in the middle of it. She looked at her father's peaceful, sleeping face. What had he known? Had he been paid for his silence? Or was his map simply a testament to his all-seeing eye, a record of the coast in its entirety, both the beautiful and the corrupt? The question burned in her, but there was no one to answer. The next morning, Ilara took a sheet of the finest vellum. She did not go to the back room. She sat at her father's old desk, in the front of the shop, in the light. With a steady hand, she began to draw. She would not give Captain Thorne a map of the coast. She would give him a key, and she would sign it with a name that was not her father's. In the bottom right corner, in a bold new script she had devised in the watches of the night, she wrote, E. Carver. Chapter 2. The Shadow in the Ink. Captain Thorne returned in 3 days. This time Ilara was waiting for him. The new chart was spread on the table, held flat at the corners by brass weights. It was a beautiful thing, a hybrid of public knowledge and private truth. The soundings, the lights, the major headlands were all as the Admiralty would expect. But overlaid upon them, in a delicate but decisive hand, was a web of new information. A faint, stippled line indicated a submerged sandbar that shifted with the winter gales. A tiny, open circle marked the location of a freshwater spring that seeped directly from the cliff face into the sea, a place where a ship could water without putting into port. And along the coastline, in a soft grey ink that seemed almost to fade into the parchment, were the hidden paths. They led from the inaccessible coves, up dry riverbeds and ancient deer trails, to the lonely crossroads and isolated farmsteads on the moors above. Thorne stood over it, silent for a long time. He didn't touch it, just let his eyes roam, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she expected. "This is not your father's work." Ilara's heart gave a single, violent lurch. She had prepared for this. "It is drawn under his direction, Captain. His knowledge—" "No," he interrupted, not harshly, but with a certainty that chilled her. He pointed to the grey ink lines. "This is not the work of a man who remembers the coast. This is the work of a person who has walked it, who has stood at the top of this ravine and looked down, who has felt the damp from that spring. This is a geologist's eye, a botanist's precision, He paused, his gaze finally lifting to meet hers. A young woman's memory of childhood explorations. He looked at the signature. E. Carver, a pseudonym. It wasn't a question. Ilara felt the floor of her carefully constructed world tilt. She said nothing, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to stop them from trembling. "I saw you, you know," he continued, his voice holding no triumph, only a strange, quiet respect. "The first day I came here. You were in the back room. The door was ajar. Your hand was on the pen, not your father's. The light caught your face. You weren't just copying, you were creating. I knew then." A wave of shame and anger washed over Ilara, shame at being caught, anger at her own carelessness. "Then why the charade?" she asked, her voice tight. "Why ask for the map at all?" "Because I needed to know if you were good," he said simply. "Lots of people can copy, few can create, and fewer still can create something like this." He gestured to the chart. "This isn't just a map, Miss Finch. It's a confession. You've just drawn the entire operational blueprint for the smuggling ring that's been plaguing this coast for a decade." The air left the room. Ilara stared at him, then down at her own creation. The grey lines, so innocent-looking, were now transformed into a trail of evidence. She thought of her father's map on the wall. It wasn't a record of crime. It was a witness to it. And she had just become an accomplice or an informant. She wasn't sure which. I didn't know," she stammered. "My father's map. It was just the coast, the whole coast. I didn't understand what it meant." "Perhaps you didn't," Thorne allowed, "but you understand now." He leaned forward, his intensity returning. "This spring here," he said, pointing to the open circle. "The sea serpent was seen hove to off this point 3 weeks ago. We assumed she was taking on water, but we couldn't figure out where. The cliffs are 100 feet high. Now I know. She fills her casks from a boat using a canvas hose. It's brilliant. And this path..." He traced a grey line inland from a cove marked only as a scattering of rocks. "This leads directly to the old Woolcombe farm, abandoned, supposedly. But I'll wager it's where the contraband is sorted before being moved to the city." He looked up at her, and for the first time, there was something other than a captain's professional assessment in his eyes. There was a flicker of admiration. "You have a gift, Miss Finch, a dangerous one. You see what others don't. You connect the land and the sea in a way that reveals the truth." "What will you do?" she whispered. "I will use this map," he said, his voice hardening again. "I will lay a trap, but not a net. A net is too wide. This calls for a baited hook, and for that, I need more than lines on paper. I need a guide." Ilara blinked. "A guide. Someone who knows these paths as well as you've drawn them. Someone who can move through that landscape without raising suspicion. A man would be noticed. A woman, a cartographer's daughter, out sketching the view, collecting herbs. She would be invisible." He held her gaze. "I need you, Miss Finch. Carver." The audacity of it stole her breath. He was asking her to leave the safety of her workshop, to walk into the very heart of the danger she had only just discovered, to become a spy. Her first instinct was to refuse, to retreat behind her walls of vellum and ink. But then she thought of her father, unknowingly complicit. She thought of the honest captains and crews whose ships were undersold by smuggled goods. She thought of the lawlessness that had become so normal, people no longer saw it. And she thought of the challenge in Captain Thorne's storm-grey eyes. He wasn't just asking for help. He was asking her to step out of her father's shadow and into her own light. "The Woolcombe farm," she said slowly, her mind already working, picturing the map. "If you approach it from the coast path, they'll see you coming for miles. But there's an old mine track that comes in from the east, behind the ridge. It's overgrown but passable on foot. They wouldn't be watching that way." A slow, approving smile touched the corner of Thorne's mouth. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and it transformed his stern face. "Show me." And so it began. For the next fortnight, Elara Finch became E. Carver in truth. She would leave the shop in the care of a trusted old clerk, a man grateful for the extra coin and incurious about her comings and goings. Dressed in sturdy wool skirts and stout boots, a sketching portfolio slung over her shoulder, she would meet Liam Thorne on the outskirts of town. They would ride out on sturdy moorland ponies to the edges of the map, and then they would walk. He was a different man on the land. At sea, he was command and control. Here, he was an observer, quiet, watchful, and deferential to her knowledge. She showed him the ravine at Blackwater Point, where the cleft in the rock was so narrow you could touch both sides. She led him to the spring, its presence given away only by a darker stain of damp on the cliff face far below. They scouted the mine track to Woolcombe, finding fresh hoofprints in the muddy sections. They hid in a gorse thicket and watched the abandoned farm, seeing the faint plume of smoke from a hidden chimney, the comings and goings of hard-faced men who were not farmers. During those long, hushed hours of observation, they talked. He told her of his life at sea, of the ships he had commanded, of the men he had lost. He spoke of the injustice of the smuggling trade, not the romance of it, but the brutal reality, the violent gangs, the ruined honest traders, the corruption that seeped into every level of coastal life. She told him of her father, of the silent years of learning, of the bittersweet satisfaction of seeing her work used by sailors who would never know her name. "It must be strange," he said one afternoon as they lay on their stomachs overlooking a tiny hidden cove, "to have your skill be so vital and yet so invisible." "It's safe," she replied, her eyes on the cove below. "Invisibility has its advantages." "Does it?" He turned his head to look at her. "Or does it just mean you're never seen for who you truly are?" His question hung in the salt air between them. She had no answer. Below them, a small boat beached on the shingle, and two men began hauling heavy-looking casks from a cleft in the rocks. The sea serpent's shore party. They watched in silence, noting their movements, their routines. Liam reached out, and his hand briefly covered hers where it rested on a tuft of grass. A silent signal of shared purpose, of shared danger. It was a touch that said more than words. It said, "I see you." In that moment, Elara felt the walls of her fortress begin to crumble. She was no longer just a cartographer's daughter, a forger of names. She was a player in a high-stakes game, and she was playing it alongside a man whose integrity and courage made her want to be braver than she had ever thought possible. The danger was real, but for the first time in her life, so was she. Chapter 3. The Cartographer's Game. The plan Liam devised was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its execution. The map Elara had drawn was not just a tool for understanding the smuggling routes, it was to become a tool for manipulating them. They would use the smugglers' own network against them. The linchpin was the Woolcombe farm. From their observations, it was clear this was the primary inland distribution point. Contraband, fine silks, casks of brandy, chests of tea, was landed at the hidden coves, hauled up the treacherous paths by ponies, and stored in the farm's cellars before being loaded onto wagons disguised as farm carts and taken to Port Marchant and beyond. "We can't catch them all at once," Liam explained, hunched over Ilara's map in the back room of the shop late one night. A single oil lamp illuminated their faces. "It's a hydra. Cut off one head and 2 more grow back. We need to cut off the head and poison the body." Ilara, her mind now fully engaged in the hunt, traced the routes inland from Woolcombe. "The poison," she said slowly, "is their distribution. If we could get them to move a major shipment on a night of our choosing to a place of our choosing—" "Exactly." Liam's eyes gleamed with approval. "We create a false opportunity, a buyer who doesn't exist, offering a premium price for an immediate clandestine delivery. We get them to move their entire stock in trade from Woolcombe." "But how?" Ilara asked. "They're paranoid. They won't trust a stranger." "No," Liam agreed, "but they'd trust one of their own. Or rather, they'd trust a message from one of their own." He leaned forward. "The Sea Serpent's captain, a man they call Renfrew, is the only link between the sea and the shore. His contact at Woolcombe is a man named Crabtree. They communicate via notes, left in a dead drop, a hollow tree near the cove where we saw the boat." Ilara's breath caught. "You want to intercept the message. Forge a new one." "I want you to intercept the message," Liam corrected gently, "and forge a new one. You've spent your life mimicking one man's hand. Can you mimic another's?" It was a challenge perfectly suited to her unique hidden talent. All her life, she had used her skill to hide. Now, Liam was asking her to use it to reveal, to become not a forger of maps, but a forger of truth. The next few days were a nerve-shredding exercise in patience and stealth. They located the dead drop, a gnarled, lightning-blasted oak overlooking the cove. For 2 nights, Liam hid among the rocks while Ilara waited at a nearby inn, her heart in her throat. On the 3rd night, he returned with a folded, greasy piece of paper. It was a short note from Renfrew, informing Crabtree of an incoming shipment, 100 casks of fine French brandy to be landed in 3 nights' time during the new moon. Ilara studied the handwriting. It was a crude, serviceable script, the hand of a man more used to a tiller than a pen. But it had its quirks, a particular way of forming the letter G, a heavy slash for a full stop. She spent the next day practicing on scraps of parchment, filling page after page until her own hand reproduced Renfrew's script without thought. Then, with Liam dictating, she wrote the new message. It confirmed the shipment, but changed the landing point from the usual cove to a smaller, more treacherous inlet 3 miles further north, a place Ilara knew was virtually inaccessible from the land side, except for one narrow, easily guarded path. It instructed Crabtree to bring every available man and all his ponies to this new location, as the goods were hot and needed to be moved inland and dispersed immediately to a new, wealthy buyer in the next county. The note was signed with Renfrew's crude initial. That night, Liam crept back to the dead drop and replaced the original message with Ilara's forgery. The trap was set. On the night of the new moon, the sky was an inkwell, the stars smothered by thick clouds. Ilara was not on the cliff tops. Against Liam's strenuous objections, she was with him and a hand-picked crew of 6 of his most trusted men, huddled in the freezing hold of a small, 2-masted fishing smack. They were the bait. The plan was simple. They would be the wealthy buyers' representatives, waiting in the inaccessible cove. When the smugglers arrived with the brandy, they would be caught on the beach, trapped between the sea and the cliff. "You should be in Port Marchant," Liam whispered for the 10th time, his breath misting in the cold air. His face was barely a foot from hers in the darkness. "And you should have a cartographer who can read the beach in the dark," she whispered back, her fear giving her voice a sharp edge. "The tide will be on the turn. If they try to beach their longboats in the wrong spot, they'll stave them in on the rocks. We need to know where they'll land, or this whole thing is for nothing." He fell silent, but his hand found hers in the dark and squeezed. It was a gesture of frustrated affection, and it warmed her more than any blanket could. The wait was interminable. The only sounds were the groan of the boat's timbers and the gentle lapping of water against the hull. Then, cutting through the darkness, came a new sound, the rhythmic splash of oars. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. She peered through a crack in the hatch cover. Out on the black water, she could just make out a darker shape, then another. 2 longboats, heavily laden, pulling for the shore. They came in exactly where she had predicted, the lead boat's keel grinding softly onto the shingle at the highest point of the tide. Dark figures jumped out, beginning to unload the casks. For a few precious minutes, the beach was a hive of illicit industry. Then Liam moved. "Now!" he roared, and the night exploded. He and his men burst from the hold, leaping over the side into the icy shallows, cutlasses drawn. They were met with shocked cries and the ringing of steel. Ilara stayed in the boat, her heart in her throat, watching the chaos. It was a brutal, confusing melee in the dark, lit only by the flash of blades and the occasional spurt of a dark lantern. Then a new sound, the thunder of hooves from the cliff path above. Crabtree and his men, descending the narrow trail with their ponies. They were walking into the trap from the other side. Liam's men on the cliff, who had been waiting in silence, sprang their own ambush. The narrow path became a slaughterhouse. Men and ponies screamed, tangled together, some falling from the path onto the beach below. In the chaos, one of the longboats, which had hung back, began to pull away from the shore. It was Renfrew. He had suspected a trap, and had waited. Now he was abandoning his men and his cargo. Ilara saw it happen. She saw the boat pulling for the open sea, saw the chance of catching the ringleader slipping away. Without a conscious thought, she was out of the smack and into the water. The cold stole her breath, but her legs kept moving. She waded to the second longboat, the one now empty on the beach. 2 of Liam's men were there, securing a captive. "The oars!" she gasped, pointing. "He's getting away!" One of the men, a grizzled boatswain named Matthews, looked from her to the fleeing boat. "We'll never catch him in this, miss. He's got a start." But Ilara was already scrambling into the boat. "He won't know the reef," she said, her voice shaking but clear. She pointed into the darkness beyond the fleeing vessel. "There's a finger of rock just below the surface, 50 yards out. It's not on any chart, but my father's. He'll rip his bottom out." Matthews stared at her for a second, then a savage grin split his face. "By God, miss, let's go give him a push." They piled into the boat, Matthews and another sailor taking the oars. They pulled with a desperate, furious strength. Ahead, they could see Renfrew's boat, a ghost on the water. They were gaining, but slowly. Then, a horrible, splintering crash tore through the night, followed by shouts of alarm. Renfrew's boat had found the reef. By the time they reached him, the longboat was half swamped, and the smuggler captain was floundering in the freezing water, cursing the sea, the rocks, and the treachery of maps. They hauled him aboard, a bedraggled, defeated man. As Matthews tied his hands, Renfrew's wild eyes fell on Ilara, the only woman on the water. He looked at her, then at the dark shape of the hidden reef. "A woman?" He spat, his voice filled with disbelief. A woman knew that rock was there. On whose map? Ilara, soaked to the bone and shivering violently, met his gaze. For the first time in her life, she did not look away. "Mine," she said. Chapter 4. The True North. Dawn broke over Port Marchant like a benediction, painting the harbour in shades of rose and gold. The town was abuzz with news of the night's events. The Sea Serpent had been intercepted at sea by a revenue cutter acting on a tip-off. Renfrew and Crabtree were in chains. A dozen of their crew were captured, and a king's ransom in contraband was seized. The smuggling ring that had held the coast in its grip for a decade had been shattered in a single night. In the workshop on the hill, Elara Finch sat by the fire opposite her father. Silas Finch was more alert than he had been in years. The commotion, the whispered conversations Elara had finally had with him, the news spreading through the town, it had all pulled him back from the grey mist of his illness. He held his masterpiece, the great map of the coast, on his lap, his trembling fingers tracing the grey lines she had told him about. "I knew," he said, his voice a dry whisper, "not their names, not their plans, but I knew the land was being used for ill. I charted it because a map is a witness, it cannot look away." He looked up at his daughter, his eyes clear and bright for the first time in years. "But I could not act. I could not speak. I could only draw. You, my brave girl, you did the rest. You became the witness who could also be the judge." A knock at the door interrupted them. Elara opened it to find Liam Thorne, still in his uniform, looking tired but exultant. He removed his hat as he entered, his eyes going immediately to the old man by the fire. "Captain Thorne," Elara said, her heart doing a familiar flutter. "This is my father, Silas Finch. Father, this is the man who turned your witness into a weapon." Liam crossed the room and knelt by the old man's chair. "It is an honour, sir. Your map. It was the key. It saw everything." Silas looked from Liam's earnest face to his daughter's glowing one. A slow, knowing smile touched his lips. "It saw the coast," he corrected gently. "But it was Elara who saw the truth in it, and it was Elara who had the courage to show you." He held out the map to Liam. "Take it. It belongs with someone who will use it for good." Liam accepted the map with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. He then turned to Elara. "The Admiralty is going to have questions," he said, "about the map of the coast, about the intelligence that led to the captures, about a cartographer named E. Carver." Elara's brief moment of triumph wavered. Exposure. The thing she had feared for so long. "I see." "I told them the truth," Liam continued, his voice firm. "I told them that the charts they've been using for years, the ones signed Finch, were the work of a woman of extraordinary skill. I told them that the map that broke the smuggling ring was drawn by the same hand, E. Carver." The silence in the room was absolute. Elara stared at him, her mind a blank. "The Admiralty hydrographer," Liam said, a smile finally breaking through his stern demeanour, "wishes to commission a new, comprehensive survey of the entire Sea of Thorns. He wants it done by the finest cartographer on the coast. He wants it done by E. Carver, and he doesn't care if E. Carver wears skirts or trousers." A wave of emotion, so powerful it threatened to overwhelm her, swept through Elara. It was joy, terror, relief, and a wild, exultant freedom all mingled together. Her father chuckled, a dry, happy sound. "Well, daughter," he said, "it seems E. Carver has a new chart to draw." Liam stayed for supper that night, the first of many. He and Silas talked of ships and seas, while Elara listened, her heart full. After the old man grew tired and retired, Liam and Elara stood on the small balcony overlooking the harbour. The lights of the town glittered below, reflected in the dark water. "I have something for you," Liam said, his voice low. He reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of parchment. A gift. A token. Elara unfolded it. It was a small chart, exquisitely drawn, not of the coast, but of a single tiny cove she had never seen before. It showed a crescent of white sand, sheltered by high cliffs, with a single sturdy cottage nestled at the head of the beach. A stream ran down to the sea. In the bottom right corner, in a bold, unfamiliar hand, it was signed, L. Thorne, Delin, *. She looked up at him, speechless. "It's a place I know," he said, his stormy eyes soft in the moonlight. "On the north coast, It's peaceful, private. I thought it might make a good base for a cartographer. A place to work, away from the noise of the city. A place to be seen. He was offering her a future, not just a career, but a home. A place where she would no longer be a shadow, but the center of her own map. A place with him. Liam, she whispered, his name a new and precious sound on her lips. He took the chart from her trembling hands and laid it on the balcony railing. Then he produced a small compass from his pocket and placed it in the center of the tiny, drawn cove. The needle quivered for a moment, then steadied, pointing unerringly north. "Every map needs a true north, Ilara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you let me be yours?" The last fortress wall crumbled. Ilara Finch, the forger, the shadow, the woman who had charted 1,000 coasts but never dared to find her own place in the world, looked at the man who had seen her when she was invisible. She looked at the compass, at the steady, true line it pointed. Then she looked at the chart of their future, a blank page waiting to be filled. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying on the sea breeze. "I will." And so, the story of the lady who forged maps did not end with a captured smuggler or a shattered ring. It began anew on that balcony, under a canopy of stars, with a captain's compass pointing the way to a future as boundless and full of possibility as the sea itself.